say a very pleasant good afternoon to the teaching. I'm Lois Taylor, a teacher of English in the Department of English at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Please take a look at the topic that these young women are going to be discussing today, the general topic, and their speeches vary slightly. The far next time, James Baldwin writes, learning practices and coaching as teachers demand that we be responsive, and I'm sure responsible too. We need to respond and be responsible, and reflective. So let's join these presenters as they examine issues that impact professional growth, leadership, as well as impacting our most endangered species, our young people, our students in the schools from K through 12. And of course, we know that this also goes into higher education too. Our presenters are as follows. To my far left, Ms. Ayanna Jenkins, who teaches English and writing in the Chicago Public Schools. One of the things that I want you to know that's very special about Ayanna is that she's a board-certified teacher, very young teacher with 10 years of experience. And so we'll be delighted to hear what her findings are. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
My name is Ayanna S. Jenkins. I'm going to be talking about bringing the spark back to your teaching practice. So I'm coming from the fact, as noted, that I am a young teacher. I know 10 years for me seems a long time, but I'm fairly a young teacher. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about is bringing the spark back to your teaching. And I'm coming to you from a very personal space. I came from teaching 5 years in a very good school, a number 2 school in the district. And then I came back into Chicago where I was teaching in a school that did not perform as well as the school I came from. And I became very disenfranchised, I became unhappy, and it was reflected in my teaching, and it was reflected in the relationships that I built with my colleagues and my students. And so, as I moved into the current school I am in presently, I had to start thinking of how was I going to do things differently? What did I need to do, and how was I going to do that? And so the first thing that I began to think of in order to get that spark back, or to maintain that spark, was how was I going to shift my thinking? And that's basically the big picture. That I realized that in order to keep the spark alive in my teaching, I had to shift my thinking. I had to stop being pessimistic. I had to stop feeling like a victim and say, oh, woe is me, I'm in this school, what am I going to do? I hate it. And I had to say, okay, you're here, now what are you going to do about it? How are you going to impact your students? How are you going to get them to where they need to be? And not just my students, but how was I going to grow as a person and as a teacher? So the first thing that we talk about, which is also in our description, is that Baldwin says that teaching demands that we be responsive and we be reflective. But before we can be responsive, we have to first be reflective. We have to think about what we're doing. So the one writer who I love from the Transcendentalist period is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Love, 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 love him. And he says that a man is what he thinks about all day long. A man is what he thinks about all day long. And I love that quote because it's so true. And I want you to think about that while I have you do a small exercise for a few minutes. Is I want you to jot down or type out, whichever one you want to do. I want you to jot down what were your thoughts today. What did you think about? And how did you categorize those thoughts? So for example, today I thought about my son, he's 3. He's with his grandmother, and I haven't heard from them all day. Call, how's my baby? Where are you? Is everything okay? And I have not gotten a response. So the feelings, or how I categorize those feelings, is worry, but also at the same time hopeful that everything is okay. So what I'm asking you to do for about a minute, minute and 30, I want you to jot down, or I want you to think about what were your thoughts today and how would you categorize those thoughts. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you take about a minute and 30 seconds, jot down or think about that, and then we'll share out. Okay. All right, so thinking about that, what I said earlier is that we have to shift our thinking. So paying attention to what we're thinking about. Okay. So the first thing that we need to think about in terms of our thought process is that Vincent Peale says that thoughts possess dynamic power that remake a situation. Thoughts are dynamic. So what we're thinking and how we're thinking can change a situation. Maybe there's an issue in terms of classroom management. And in your head, you're saying that your kids are just the most horrible people in the world, right? Think they're horrible. And you keep that thought in your head, and when you walk in that classroom every day, that thought is there, and what's happening, you're thinking, is perpetuating or supporting that thought. And I'm going to be okay. We have to start thinking differently on how we're doing things. Does that make sense? All right, so in terms of thinking about that, we also have Sam Parker, who wrote the book 212 Again. When we shift our thinking, we then will begin to shift our actions. But then the question then becomes, how do I shift my thinking? You can tell me I need to think differently, but how do I do that? What are the steps that I take in order to shift my thinking so I can change what's happening in my classroom, so I can change what's happening in my life? Deliberately. This is the key word to changing, is that we do it deliberately. We have an intent. We have a reason. And Vincent Peale, he talks about 4 ways that we can think deliberately. The first thing he says that we need to form a picture of the goal in our head. We've heard this before. We've already heard this. We've heard the secret. We've heard of people say that you need to picture in your head. But what I'm telling you from personal experience is that you have to do it. You have to do it. You have to do it. Because when you have that picture of your goal, you see it. That means now you can see what you're striving for. You can touch it, that you can grab it. The second thing that you have to do is that you have to develop it in all its details. Not just how you're going to do it. You need to think about who's going to be involved in that. Is it your students? Is it your administrator? Are you consulting some type of help book? Are you going to some type of seminar? Are you going to do this on a daily basis? Are you going to do this weekly? All the details of that goal need to be jotted down, and you need to be specific. The third thing Peale says is that you have to believe. If you don't believe it, then what's the point? You have negated everything that you have deliberately thought about and worked for if you don't believe and have that faith that something is going to change or be different. And remember, it's not going to happen overnight. It's just not. Anything that we want, anything that we need, we have to work for, and it doesn't always happen like that. But we got to believe. So we have to form that picture. We have to develop all the ideas. We have to believe. And lastly, we have to work to actualize the dream. So we have to take those steps and put it down in order to make that dream come to life. Does that make sense so far? Okay? So just supporting that. Sorry, I have my notes on the book. I write a lot. Once we start thinking deliberately and taking these 4 steps, then the next thing that we need to do is act. Remember, before we act, we have to think, and we have to think deliberately. So when you act, it's so important that you respond with actions that will gain positive results or move you towards your goal. Every time you take a step, it's not going to be positive. You're going to have those ups and downs. It's just like a relationship. It's just like when you're trying to lose weight. And it's just like in your classroom. Ups and downs are going to happen. But that down may be the thing that pushes you or ignites you toward that goal. And every single deliberate step that you take based on your deliberate thought is going to push you toward that goal. So again, when you take that action, you need to make sure that you respond with actions that gain positive results. And those actions are based on your deliberate thinking. When you act deliberately, you show your actions show commitment to your thinking. So when you make that plan, you envision it, you act on it, you believe in it, and when you act deliberately, you show, I'm committed to making this work. I'm committed to making sure that my kids do better on this test. I'm committed to have a better classroom environment where my kids are not yelling at each other. Does that make sense? So when we show this deliberate action, we're committed to that. When you're committed to having that deliberate thinking, and then you take that deliberate action, you're showing commitment to the whole entire process. Okay. So the results of it, and like I said, this is something personal for me. I noticed when I was transitioning from one school to the next, how I did not make positive relationships with my students. There was a total disconnect. And so what I began doing to shift my thinking was, I said, what is it that I want to feel when I walk into the classroom? I put myself in my student position. I said, what is it that I want to feel? And I said, I want them to feel respected. I want them to feel like I respect their feelings. I want them to feel warm. I want them to feel protected. I want them to be in a room that is warm and inviting. And so the steps that I took, based on that deliberate thought, the steps that I took were, I began to greet every student that walked into my classroom. Now, I had already been doing that, but I did it so when I stood at my door, and even if a student didn't speak, good morning, sweetie, how are you? Good morning, good morning, good morning. And then when I get in the classroom and get started, if I didn't say good morning to you, good morning to you all. My students leave my room, have a great evening, have a great afternoon, have a great day. Also, my room was just bright and colorful. Everything that was there reflected who they were. So they created things that were on the wall. Articles, since I teach writing and reading, articles that were on the wall reflected their interests. And everything that I did, the way I responded to them was different. I wasn't snappy because I thought about, okay, I would not want someone snapping at me when I ask a question. And we all get a little bit upset when our kids ask us the same question. But then I'm thinking, I'm sitting in the PD, and I know my principal's talking to me. And I heard her, but I didn't quite hear what she said. And so, you know, you're kind of afraid to ask that question because you're like, dang, that's what I tell my students all the time, right? So what I did was, I stopped being angry when a student asked a question twice. Because I understood that sometimes their thinking is not catching up to what I'm saying, because that happens to me. And so when I started shifting my thinking and putting myself into my students' shoes, my classroom, oh my God, I can't get kids out of my room. I can't get them to let me have 5 minutes before school starts because they feel and they say, you are so different. We can talk to you. You just seem more relaxed. You just seem like everything is better. I said, yes, my thinking shifted. And I had to, because now I can reach them. I can say certain things to some students and another teacher cannot say. And that's because I began to shift my thinking and realizing, and what I wish that people would realize about us as educators, that we're people too. And that we deserve to be respected, we deserve to be loved, and we deserve to be cared for. So from my own personal experience, when we begin to deliberately shift our thinking, then shift deliberately paying attention to our actions, then we can change anything. I believe anything. And I really believe that. And like I said, this is coming from something personal.
Well, I think we really need to give special applause because they really adhere to their timelines.